Superfoods. Are they everything that you think they are? Hi, I'm Dr. Arland Hill. And what about these superfoods? Should they be a routine part of your diet? Well, if you listen to the media and read some of the health information out in the public eye, you would probably think that these foods should make up the majority of your diet, if not, in fact, all of your diet. But I'm going to pose a few challenges to that idea today and really take a further look at superfoods, and hopefully by the end of this video, allow you to have a different viewpoint on maybe whether or not you should be consuming these and how you should be consuming these. So first off, what are superfoods? Well, superfoods are often touted as having high nutrient levels. They're often looked at as having health benefits that are just not typically found in other health or in other foods in general. And they have the ability many times, or they've been stated as having the ability to offset chronic diseases, whether we're talking about cancer or cardiovascular disease or diabetes or any host of other conditions. They're often touted as being able to deter or reduce the risk of going down the path towards the development of these conditions. Foods that typically fall into this category are going to include such things as berries. That's probably one of the bigger classes of foods that's included in this list. We're also going to see things such as salmon, tea, kale. There's many others that will fall in various lists that you look at, but those are the ones that are often highlighted. But there's a couple of things that I want you to consider as you start looking at bringing these superfoods into your diet. We're going to start on this. Understand that when you put a heavy prevalence or a heavy emphasis on the superfoods in your diet, you're doing that at the expense of limiting other foods in your diet. And really, when we talk about the diet and making sure that someone is consuming a complete diet, the idea is not to put emphasis on one particular food or category of foods. The idea is to make sure that we're consuming a broad array of foods that are going to provide a complete profile of nutrients. There are some nutrients that we often talk about as more than others. For example, things like magnesium or zinc or B12 or folate. These nutrients tend to gather a lot of attention, but they're in reality no more important than any other nutrient, because without any single nutrient, the biochemical pathways that depend upon that nutrient begin to falter, and we as humans see a breakdown in our biochemistry and our physiology, which ultimately leads us towards chronic disease. So the idea here really with consuming foods should not be to emphasize solely superfoods. It should be to emphasize really a broad array of foods. Now, as I've looked at and reviewed many lists of superfoods, I often see that some of the foods I named starting out in this video are frequent on those lists, but what I don't often see on those lists are protein sources, meat sources. And understanding that some individuals don't make this a part of their diet, whether they're vegan or vegetarian, but appreciate that foods that are rich in protein provide a lot of value. And without adequate protein in our diet, we don't build certain classes of hormones, we don't build adequate muscle tissue, we don't adequately support our nervous system, and many other functions in the body. Our immune system begins to falter because we need proteins to build the immunoglobulins, the immune system oriented proteins that help us fight off various infections. So without this class of proteins, that major macronutrient class, we really don't have good overall human physiology. We don't function as adequately as we should. So we should think about proteins as being a superfood, if you will, as well. But again, not focusing on any one thing here. Now, what are some other concerns that we should have when it comes to looking at these quote unquote superfoods? Well, understand that if you put a heavy emphasis on a superfood, let me pick an example if I will. Kale. Kale is often talked about as a superfood, and granted, kale does have a lot of health benefits, but if someone consumes kale day in and day out, maybe they're adding this to smoothies in the morning, finding a way to incorporate it into salads throughout the day, and maybe even adding some sauteed kale in for dinner, if you will. The problem with that is ultimately you're going to develop a food sensitivity to that particular item. And regardless at that point of how many health benefits that food has, the more frequently you expose your immune system to that food, you're going to develop a sensitivity to it. This is why diversity is so important. We don't find kale available throughout the entirety of the year as it grows in its natural cycle in nature. In the grocery store, yes, we can find it year round, but that is not the natural cycle for kale. And that's also not how our body typically wants to see it. We should have periods of rotation in our diet where we introduce kale in and then it's out or out for a few days. There are other foods that can fill in. For example, chard. Chard's going to have a lot of the same benefits that kale is going to have. So we need to mix it up. We need to promote diversity. Now, here's something that when it comes to superfoods, let me ask the question, are all superfoods created equal? No, they're not. Is kale from one source the same as kale from another? No, it's not. Is organic kale going to provide an equal nutrition to conventional kale? No, it's not. We would argue that conventional kale, if it's been sprayed with herbicides, pesticides, if it hasn't been grown in a nutrient-rich soil, a living soil matrix, if that hasn't taken place, that conventional kale is not going to have the same beneficial quality to it that an organic kale raised in good, healthy soil is going to have, because many of these active medicinal-like effects that we associate with these superfoods, those come along later in the development process with those foods. Those don't happen in the early initial stages to significant quantities. So the more complex that plant can become, the more those medicinal qualities are going to be. And frankly, if foods are being sprayed with chemicals or have chemicals bound to them, one, you're negating some of the health benefits of the food, just trying to offset or balance out the negative compounds that are on that food. But then you're also not fully getting the complete nutritional profile in that food if it's been grown in that manner. Now, the last thing that I want to point out when it comes to superfoods, and I think this is probably the most important, it's quite frankly the reason I saved it to last, is that when we look at the term superfoods and ask, where do we find that term at? Where did that term originate from? Is that a term based in science, or is that a term that is simply a marketing term? And in fact, it is. The idea of superfoods is really nothing more than a term that is meant to shine light on certain classes of foods that, yes, do have health benefits and have been known to have health benefits, but it's really designed to drive sales at the end of the day. Do some health promoters emphasize the idea of superfoods? Yes. And inherently, is there anything wrong with that? No, there's not. But I think that we also have to understand that when we put added emphasis on superfoods, we really are looking at this more from a marketing perspective, and we're also not giving full consideration to how foods in general should be consumed, and with the idea of diversity in mind, that the more food we can consume, the better off we are, meaning the greater diversity of foods, not necessarily quantity in that context. Hope you have a different perspective on superfoods, and if you have some interesting thoughts on these, some of the comments that I've shared, make sure you add that down below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I'd love to hear some feedback on this. And if you like the video, make sure that you like it, and hey, share this information with someone. We all need to know more about the foods that we're consuming, how to build our own health, and just quite simply, how to be more resilient human beings and have better overall quality of life. With that being said, guys, I'm Dr. Arland Hill. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to speaking with you real soon.